first met Jerry and Thora when they still lived in Nanaimo on Beach Drive. Mark and I were invited to their dinner event with a dozen or two others at their house. People were reading poetry, not long, serious tomes, but shorter ditties. There was a lot of laughter and one booming voice, Jerry's. Jerry's always made the party fun. Usually, at least once at every happening, Jerry would spread his arms, take a deep breath, and like a conductor orchestrating a party, fling his hands wide, shake his head in disbelief, and in a booming voice say, "I'm the luckiest man in the world." Years later, when I got to know Jerry better, he told me a couple of times how he used to have a good glass of vodka or something else to get past his shyness. At least he did, until the night he tipped right over the back of the couch and fell flat onto the floor. I can see and hear Jerry lying on the floor laughing and booming out, "I'm the luckiest man." I used to moonlight for books, helping with the bookstore and Bastion's computer system and being paid in books. I noticed all the employees seemed to be happy there, always smiling, chit-chatting with customers. Even the customers had big smiles on their faces. Jerry, with a big smile, told me he was in charge of the human resources department and looked at me with a widening smile. "I'm the luckiest man." In 1990, Mark and I had moved to Protection Island, and my parents had a cabin on Cutlass Lookout. Mark and I were walking down the street to go there for dinner. I think it was Thanksgiving weekend. We ran into Jerry and Thora, who at the time had property on Gabriola and were thinking of building there, but were visiting Protection Island. We invited them to dinner. It was a typical Protection Island dinner where it didn't matter if two more guests arrived. After dinner, big, tall John Muckle arrived with a barrel made into a chair tucked under his arm. He presented it to my parents, saying he thought they needed another chair, put it on the floor, sat in it, and his island stories poured out. Those stories and that night changed Jerry and Thora's plans. Jerry used to say, "I can live everywhere," so he was easily persuaded to sell Gabriola and move to Protection. When they bought their little cabin, the owner gave notice to the renter, who was heard to threaten to burn the place down. I don't think it was an idle threat, as I had seen him at 7:30 one morning tackle John Muckle, throwing him down onto the beach after John had started up his chainsaw. The night before Jerry and Thora took possession, John Muckle, who lived next door to the little cabin, a couple of lots down, he invited us over for a card game. He didn't just invite us, I realized, looking around his living room, that he had invited the whole fire department so we could be at the ready in case the cabin started to burn. When I told Jerry the next day, he threw up his hands in a hallelujah gesture and said, "I'm the luckiest man in the world." Jerry had a great social life. At one point, he and Mark would play Doom, one of the first shoot-'em-up computer games, every afternoon. Good Stewart would come over on a regular basis and play crib. Don Corfield would come for a weekly chat. Jerry and the pool room boys would play pool. He got involved with a host of activities and made them all fun. As he said, "I'm the luckiest man in the world." In the 1990s, before cell phones, before the ProWile email list, we used to have VHF radios. If you had a boat and got into trouble, you knew that the Protection Island ferries were on the radio, and you could always call them for help on Channel 19 Alpha. So this extended to your house. Most people had the VHF turned on all day and hear conversations like, "Anyone got 2 brass screws?" Or, "Help, there's a drunk at the pub and he's punched Bob, who's now in the water." And the replies like Keith's, "I'll be right there, I'll bring my handcuffs." Jerry loved it. He had to have a radio too. I seem to remember Jerry's call sign, we all needed a call sign, was probably Bastion. One morning very early, Mark was always up by 6 a.m., the radio came on. "Green Gables, Green Gables, Green Gables, this is Bastion, come in." Mark, who was Green Gables, because we had green trim on our windows, answered, "Green Gables, go ahead, Bastion." "Hey, Mark, I have a 35-foot powerboat on my beach with no one aboard." Mark ran out onto the deck and looked down towards Jerry's, and sure enough, there was a boat high and dry, and it didn't look damaged. "Hey, Mark, I'm going to claim salvage rights." "Aren't I the luckiest man in the world?" It turned out it had been stolen, used until it ran out of gas, then abandoned, and eventually drifted with the tide onto the beach. Jerry had a motorbike, a bright red one, and he and Mark had a few adventures. Mark was a bit nervous as Jerry liked speed, and once came home after a particularly fast ride saying, "I'm so glad Jerry is the luckiest guy in the world." One day, Jerry went out on his own and headed up a logging road towards Nanaimo Lakes. He took a corner too fast on the loose gravel and spun out, ending up flat on his back, unable to get up. Eventually, a truck driven by two hunters looking for deer came by, and they thought they saw movement, maybe a deer. They stopped, got their rifles out, then noticed the red motorcycle to find Jerry almost hidden in the scrub and got him to hospital. As Jerry said later, "I'm the luckiest man in the world." One weekend, while staying at the Sylvia Hotel, Jerry went out onto the balcony and lit up a joint. He inhaled deeply and started coughing. He coughed so hard his dentures fell out. Right out onto the roof of the balcony below. Jerry was horrified. What was he going to do without his dentures? How was he going to explain this? After gargling with Listerine, he went down to the front desk and told the young man about a coughing fit. "No problem," the desk clerk said. "The room below you is empty. I can climb up and get it." When the young man climbed onto the railing and peered over the roof, he turned and looked down at Jerry. "Can you describe yours? There are a few dentures up here." After telling us about his adventure, Jerry ended it with, "I'm the luckiest man." Jerry loved his newspapers and loved his New Yorker. He loved people and he loved conversation. He wouldn't hesitate to start a conversation on the ferry. Everyone knew and liked Jerry. He once looked at me in the eye and said, "I want to know what makes you tick." He was like that. He wanted to know everyone, not on a superficial level, but deeply. He made you feel important. Important enough to know your inner thoughts. He might have said, "I'm the luckiest man in the world," but we here are the luckiest people in the world to have known Jerry.